Welcome to our Bucky weekend call of February 18th or 19th, depending on which continent you're on. Manu, how are you feeling today and what do you anticipate to get out of the call?
I don't really know how I feel because I didn't sleep much. But anyway, I'm happy to be here. This is a space. I'm grateful that you guys are present and that we're going to have a good exchange. That's my expectation. And how do you feel? What do you expect?
Thank you, Manu. I'm glad to be here. Although I won't be able to write today, the nurse actually pulled my arm up and stretched the muscle, not intentionally. So my arm is completely out of whack. But anyway, so I would love to go through the video after today's discussion, so I can take down the things I want to write into my book. Okay, so looking forward to our thoughts, our exploration into the mind of a great man, Bucky. Okay, yeah. So, John, how do you feel, and what is your take? What do you expect takeaway today?
I'm feeling great. It's becoming quite warm here, so I'm very happy to be inside with the air conditioning on, having had a walk in the park. And I always enjoy my Sundays, especially when I can catch up with you. And I'm just looking forward to understanding Bucky a little better by the end of the call. He has so much depth and so much knowledge, and always learn something out of it. But as we know, repetition leads to discovery. So it doesn't matter how many times I'm exposed to it, there's always something new. So that's how I feel. Joe, how do you feel? What do you hope to take out of today?
I'm feeling great and fortunate to be here with everybody and excited to see everyone. It's always a blessing. I'm expecting to continue on this journey with Grunch of the Giants, and to continue to just see what we can take from Bucky's last work. And for many that they feel it's his deepest work, so that we're getting a real deep understanding of the history of economics, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm excited about that. So I guess Steve or Manu went, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I've been.
All right, sorry. Steve, how do you feel, and what would you like to take away?
Well, I'm feeling pretty good. We're 26 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -3 centigrade. And so, John, whatever it is you got, be grateful for it, I suppose. It's cold out there. It's cold out there. But I'm also excited to continue with the last few sessions here with Grunch of Giants has been kind of depressing, because it seems like that Bucky back in the 60s, and then reiterating in this book in the 80s, was really aware of how the systems just really worked against the betterment of all humankind, and how each of us have a decision to make. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to read this, to see what we can do what I can do to make a difference in the planet. Even though I think I'm on a pretty good path, his background is really worthwhile. So we kind of liked last week, we were in a place where he was talking about how in the past things were getting bigger and bigger, and that inciting the Queen Mary, and how industry was going a certain way. Then suddenly airplanes started coming in, and suddenly in 1961, 3 jet airplanes outperformed the SS United States in carrying capacity in hours or days. So we're doing more with less, and he's all about ephemeralization, doing more with less. And we kind of left off somewhere in here, and we'll continue reading from here.
I think that's where we're up to. Another example is where we start today.
Exactly right.
Do you want me to do the honors?
Yeah, would you please, John? I was going to just say that, so thanks.
Okay. Another example of the little to big to little evolution is manifest in the world of mathematical computing. In developing trigonometry and its solution by logarithms, thousands of monks worked for hundreds of years to produce the 1-degree tables of sines, cosines, tangents, and cotangents. During the Great Depression years of 1930 to 1936, the British and German mathematicians were hired by their governments in a joint project to calculate the table of functions to a 1 minute of arc exactitude. Then came the big post-World War II calculating machines. Univac et al., filling whole university buildings with thousands of fermionic tubes. Then came the tubeless transistor and computers weighing and bulking far less, until we came to printed circuits and chips and tabletop equipment doing better work than the whole building filling equipment. Before all this, I myself spent 2 pre-calculator or computer years carrying out the trigonomic calculations for geodesic domes. I had to do so longhand. Then appeared 75-pound electric calculating machines, followed by the pocket-sized computers with which the trigonomic problems that took me 2 years of work became solvable in 1 day by one person. This process promises within a few years to become so miniaturized and so comprehensively capable as to be the size of a hearing aid, though able to interact with all the world around computers and able to discern how best to operate our planet, making obsolete the opinions of corporate or government executives.
Let's pause right there for a second. Anybody have any comments or questions on what he's noted so far?
I
He
mean,
might be foreshadowing AI.
Yeah.
right.
And so-
AI and just the, oh, go ahead, Manu.
No, I was just going to say general comment that I note that Bucky always overshoots in terms of his optimism on technology and undershoot on government. He underestimates what the power of these governments are.
Yeah. I thought it was it's very interesting. He says, you know, all this in the size of a hearing aid. I don't, you know, nothing got, although the phone is bigger than a hearing aid, there's, I think, a lot more than he thought even possible packed into this little puppy,
Oh, yes. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know. Making, and then this is the key point for me, making obsolete the opinions of corporate or government executives. So far,
They
those,
won't like that.
so far, they haven't allowed themselves to become obsolete, have they?
No.
No,
Boy, that just, but
that's
they are pretty much obsolete. They just don't think they are, and so they're, you know, hanging on with a dear thread.
Well, they obstruct progress to preserve a position for themselves.
Absolutely.
You know,
And
it just
uh,
occurred, sorry, it just
Go ahead, Ann.
occurred to, yeah, it just occurred to me that, you know what, all it takes is someone to start a country, maybe not a country, but you know, across the world where, you know, those who want to belong to it can belong to it. Because I realized, like Google and there's a company in Malaysia, they set up this university, and you know, when it's worldwide, if you know, be a university, right, then literally there's nobody to tell you yes or no. Number one, yeah. Number two, there is this Earth 2. How many of you have heard of this app called Earth 2? Or there's this whole project called Earth 2?
I haven't heard of it.
Oh,
Earth
okay.
too. No.
Earth 2, yeah. So a friend of mine, Hong Kong friend, she actually started buying land on Earth 2, and it is literally, it's up in cyberspace, no actual land, right? So they just took the map of the whole world and allowed people to buy up the land on Earth 2. So they're buying over land that belongs to other people. You get what I'm saying? So, but it's on the map of this cyber map. It's not even a actual map, but people were buying up the land, and they were looking at areas like near gold mines and around the cities, and where, you know, there are critical areas. Those pieces of land got snapped up. That was across the world. So if they're doing that, there's nothing stopping somebody from, you know, setting us up something, and we call ourselves call themselves citizens of the world, and set up a whole, you know, thing. No, I don't see it being like, it's just like what happened with Bitcoin, you know, it literally overrode the financial systems around the world. Anyway, just a thought, throwing it out there. I'm done.
Yeah.
Let me put it a little bit different, Anne.
Mm,
Just a devil's advocate here.
mm,
Okay. I've just seen here Earth 2. That is the metaverse of
mm,
real estate. Now, what has all of this achieved other than driving some generations into chimeras? You understand what I'm trying to mean? Illusions. Because if you look at what is at stake now, there was the blockchain technology that is really a technology with promises, right? In terms of freeing the individual from the clutches of organized crime. That's what blockchain is, distributed ledger all around, in such a way that somebody cannot sit somewhere because completely distributed and encrypted, you know, try to manipulate and cheat, as opposed to centralized ledgers. So that is a technology on its own. What is happening? What are central banks doing? It has morphed now, and the danger now is that everybody is going to be like a number, and they can turn you on or off in terms of you accessing things. I don't know if you heard about these things that I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Manu,
the control complete. So what my point is, there is a technology, but there's always that other part of it. That is your final examination of an individual.
Yeah.
And if that one is not really understood and people take position vis-a-vis it, clearly there's always that side that comes positionally and can whipsaw you in a way that you don't understand what it is.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that. Of course, the horrors of it can come with it. But I'm just saying that if you look at that, the way the world is going, it's a possibility that someone could do that, and it's already starting to happen where people are looking at the cyberspace to create a lot of communities and outside of the regulatory bodies of the world, of various countries, right? So I'm just saying,
Cool. Okay, so let's continue. Here we go. I think we stopped at one person here, and I think the next thing is this process promises, right, John?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
This process promises within a few years to become so miniaturized and so comprehensively capable as to be the size of a hearing aid.
Yeah, there we go.
So able to interact with all the world around computers and able to discern how best to operate our planet, making obsolete the opinions of corporate or government executives. As mass capital venturing flourished after World War I, General Foods Company absorbed many pre-World War I individually owned independent mass producers of canned and packaged food. General Electric acquired other successful electrical goods manufacturers. The growth of corporate venture activity was, however, at that time, yet identified by unique product categories. After World War II, mergers and acquisitions and outright takeovers amalgamated almost all.
Hang on.
Hang on.
I'm so sorry.
That's right. Almost all successful industrial capital ventures, regardless of their class of produced goods and services. The great conglomerates found it more profitable, safer, and more credit powerful to diversify their risking. The successful biggies became ever more gargantuan. For example, the DuPont Chemical Company's 1981 acquisition of Conoco, America's 9th largest oil company, for $7.57 billion to form the 7th largest industrial corporation in the US. Because many of these conglomerates embraced all the national defence weaponry production, they legally qualified for guaranteed government bailout should their operation become financially embarrassed or debts unmeetable. The US government's decade ago bailout of Lockheed Aircraft, or its multi-billion-dollar guaranteed loan to private Chrysler Corporation, the government's military tank producer, are the current outstanding examples. Invisible Know-How Inc. As mentioned earlier, limited liability abstract corporate beings needed no passports to travel altogether invisibly across national borders. Soon after World War II, America's 500 largest corporations became supranational, taking with them out of the United States the invisible legal controls over what had been born as American industry with all its know-how. This know-how had been paid for initially by the US people through their government's wartime, or on the brink of war times, underwriting of the prime technologies as initially developed only for the US Department of Defense or the Manhattan Project or the space program. Developed in wartime at government, we the people's expense, and turned over gratis for operational efficiency in peacetime to privately owned corporations. World War I brought vast munitions buying on credit by the US government, and the figures ran into multi-millions of dollars as private US industrial corporations acquired post-war operational rights to all the wartime government financed new era technology production machinery. Stockholders prospered. World War II saw the same US government credit employed to produce multi-vaster new technology munitions, with the dollar figures running this time into the multi-billions of dollars. World War III's third of a century of Cold Warring between the USA and the USSR, waged vicariously through many hot war puppeted nations, has seen the annual munitions figures running into the multi-trillions of dollars. The USA 1981 national debt is over $1 trillion, and the US cannot pay even the interest on that debt. We can very properly call World War I the $1 million war, and World War II the $1 billion war, and World War III the $1 trillion war.
Let's pause right there for just a second. Any comments or questions?
Well, the first comment just here is, what is the US debt today? Can somebody give me? Joe, what was it?
I think it's 13 trillion. I'll look it
I
up.
think it's far more than that. I think it's 31, I think.
You think it is? You're closer to it than I am.
I used
Okay. So it means that all our means in 40 years have gone down 30 times, right? If you were 1 trillion in 1981, and we are 40 years from 1981, or 41 years to be precise. So in that time, that debt has gone up 40 times. 30, you say 30 billion, 30 trillion, Joe?
It says 31 trillion right there.
Yes, it's
Oh,
gone
yeah.
up. It's gone up 30 times. That is scary. That was my first observation. The second one is, this guy saw, I don't know if he saw, or is it that we just encountering recurring problems, generations to generations. It's always been the same stuff.
Yeah, we could have a conversation about what is money. We could have that.
I mean,
The fiat system and the fact that every dollar spent spends 7 times, and the fact that within the next 10 or 15 years, 3D printers and artificial intelligence and robots will probably replace most jobs.
Mm.
And so this
Mhm.
concept of universal basic income is, hey, people don't need to produce anything. Machines are producing it. Let's just give them the money and let them buy the products produced by the machines. I just heard this argument last week.
But the counter argument to that, Steve, is not the counter. The dual to it is that you are perpetually in debt.
Right.
Yeah.
Infinitely, you can't pay the debt, so you rent. So you're given. And all the conditions are determined for you. Because you don't have choice, you don't have leverage, you don't have ownership.
And this is, I'm sorry, Manu.
Yeah, go on, man.
No, so, and this is the reason why technology hasn't overcome some of the power structures that are kind of in place. They haven't, it hasn't, because, you know, ultimately the machines and the technology is actually owned by the power structures. So that then, yeah, okay, let's just say they do give us a universal basic income. I mean, is that, you know, really going to solve any of the problems that of these like these corporations or government structures that are in place that are actually extracting value from everyone?
You
and
know,
everything.
We eat insect, they eat caviar.
Can you say that again?
I say, you know, just really to, is very stylized. I say UBI, the mass eats insects, and the elite eats caviar.
Yeah.
yeah, it's, and then it seems to me that what's happening is there's actually possibly two or more worlds going on, because what you have here in the industrial world, the political world, which is constantly being controlled by the industrial world and interfacing with the industrial world, with open door policies. People leave government, go into corporations, leave corporations and go into government. The ex-oil producers are running the environmental protection agencies. I mean, everything is so weird. And then there's a human being having an experience. And then I think of Viktor Frankl's book, you know, In Search of Meaning, Man's Search for Meaning,
Mm.
where here he is in a prison camp doing brain surgery on people and somehow having an experience and making choices in that horrendous environment.
Mhm.
Wow, mind-boggling.
I'm
you-
gonna take us back, you know, months ago when Kelly was with us, right? Because this relates to what he said, and you know, and over time, I've actually given some thought to it, because he said back then, there are already talks of people being paid not to work, right?
Right.
So that really got me thinking, because then what does a world look like where people are being paid not to work? Then I realized it's already happening, that people are paid not to work. You know, people are paid to play. People are paid to sing. People are paid to, you know, so especially like those people who are playing football, they're paid to pay. They're paid to play. People playing esports, and you know, and they earn a lot of money from doing that. And I'm not talking about even top players, because the esports community, live streamers make a lot of money too. And one of my little students, the father is like a big gamer, you know, he makes money from selling objects and all that online. He's my group registrar. And so he got his son very early on, like 7 years old, 8 years old. He already started having his own live streaming thing. And this little kid is talking about himself playing. He's got quite a lot following, and he sells his own merchandising. So my point is this. Then it's like, it's already happening. I'm already seeing people being paid not to work. They're paid to sing and act and dance and those very things that love doing. Games are the biggest. Money being thrown into so many games. And so it got me thinking as to, okay, you know what is the education system that's going to support, you know, this moving forward, so people still they earn from doing what they love. So they are paid not to work. You get it? So and so right now, our school, we're like, you know what, IGCSE is there, but we are actually turning a lot of the things that we do into creating opportunities for the kids to grow in all other areas, you know. So a golf academy coming up. I think you all knew I mentioned that about 2 weeks ago, and so on. So yeah, let's prep kids for that and let them make the money from, and it's like even to support these industries. We've got a program from the UK now that trains kids on the career and the industry around esports. So you can even learn the nutrition of esports and how to advise, train, and consult for people who probably are playing, when they play games, like they go competitive gaming, then how do you advise them on how to keep themselves healthy and things like that. It's very, very interesting. So just a thought out there that perhaps there is something in that, and that's what technology does. It frees us up to do the things that we want to do. So I'm not seeing it being different, except that we will be taken to the other extreme, right? Yeah. John?
And one of the biggest issues I see coming out of that, let's just say governments around the world decided to do a mental shift and embrace Bucky and pay all those who don't really need to be employed to work, to provide them with a universal wage so that they're free. I see the biggest challenges then being social challenges, because most of us get our self-esteem and well-being from our employment. We get a sense of satisfaction through creating something or helping someone. For me, I get satisfaction out of helping clients. So in my experience, many people, if not the majority of people, would then struggle with their value individually if they have nothing to do, with the use of their time, with maintenance of interest. I had a coffee on Friday with a stockbroker who had lived in the fast lane in Melbourne with young children. He and his wife decided to get out of the fast lane and move to a coastal town in Western Australia. And they've lived there for 13 years. And the youngest of the children is now in the final year of high school. So they've given their children a coastal lifestyle on the beach, a slower pace of life than the big city. But what he said is he's feeling now that he is succumbing to a very laid-back lifestyle and community. So they've decided to sell it and move to Perth to live in a faster-paced community, to be more stimulated. His wife's just completed her MBA, and she is in employment. But they've experimented with themselves and their family, and what they've decided is we will lose our drive, we will lose our enthusiasm, our meaning for life if we stay living, because he's able to work online. He can work from anywhere in the world. He has a selection of clients who employ him to manage their portfolios, and he could be anywhere. But he's decided that for the people he surrounds himself with and the pace of life, it's healthier for them to move back to a reasonable sized city rather than living in a very laid back area. The area where they live is very, very laid back. My question is, if nobody has to work and they've got their...
No. It's not about nobody has to work. I'm not talking about nobody has to work. We're not even talking about the universal wage thingy, because the communist countries have done that. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. What I'm saying is that you can be paid not to work, but it will be people paying you not to work. You get what I'm saying? So, and it's like, so the what do you call the footballers, for instance, they're paid to play, right? They're paid to play. And there's a whole ecosystem surrounding a person being paid to play, from assistance, personal special assistance to, even having people who are able to do sports science and things like that. There's a whole industry around people being paid not to work. And people are being paid to support people paid not to work. You get what I'm saying? And so, and these people who are paid not to work are also spending their money on other things. They're paying other people who are paid not to work. So I'm not talking about government here, So it is about, because the minute all this technology comes in and frees us up from doing all the mundane stuff, we will find other things to do, and we will find things that we want to do. And I think that the whole idea of being paid not to work, I like it because it is not about not working. It is the whole idea we have to shift of doing the things that we like doing. And if you are able to create value for people, you just imagine artists and all that, they're paid not to work. They are paid to do what they do best.
Unless you regard what they do as work, you see, that's a mindset.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I'm a little bit confused of your use of the word work.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
yeah.
Well, that's her
We
point.
have to-
Because
That's her
because
point.
let me okay. Can I say why I'm confused?
Yeah, sure.
Because in my opinion, there are very few people who work harder than footballers.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
But they're doing what they love.
And yeah, but therefore the issue may not be the one, or there might be many issues around this thing. And one of the issues that I in particular had is the issue that, and Joe mentioned it, there is control.
Right.
Whether a government or a few people, there are people who believe that they can control and therefore discriminate access to it, right? Be gatekeepers and be kind of giving out. And what guarantees that they give it out in proportions that really develop the potential that our quest is for? We are on this quest of living, trying to have everybody really uncover his potential, his or her potential, and expose it, develop it, and expose it to the betterment of all moving forward. That's what we call civilization.
Right.
Yeah.
So-
Let me put it, sorry,
Okay, go ahead.
Stephen, just one, I'll pass to you. Just I mean, what I'm coming from is, you know, how we say that if you love what you do, you don't have to work a day in your life. That's where I'm coming from, right? If you get, I'm not saying being unproductive, it's about if you love science, you just want to be involved with creation, inventions, and exploring science, it's not work. Okay,
Yeah.
Steve, over to you. I think you've got something.
Well, no, I was just going to reinforce that. I love what your point, John's point, and Manu's point. And so I like to bring them all together, because actually they've been testing UBIC, this giveaway income in markets and little markets. It's worked. People who have been laying around once they didn't have to compete in a market, once they had the money to do what they wanted, they started improving their lives. They've been testing this in the US and in Europe in a couple of markets, and it's been working. You know, John brought up a really good point, and that is that a lot of people develop their sense of worth, self-worth from their job because they got no other way to coordinate or relate in the universe. And John gave a good example of somebody who decided it'd be fun to move back into a city environment, pick up the pace a little bit and get that master's degree, you know, and to them, that's fun. And Anne, when you started talking about it, I realized I haven't worked I think I've only worked 6 months out of my life. The rest of the time, I'm having fun doing real estate. I'm having fun teaching real estate, you know, and I don't see myself ever retiring from what I'm doing, because why quit? I'm having fun. It's about my personal development. It's about me being more of who I am. And I do believe that, you know, and Bucky, I'm just going to throw this out. Bucky says that human beings are problem solvers. I almost agree with that. And I really agree with the idea, if the problem is, how do I have an experience that's fun on this planet? You know, that's the big problem I want to solve, is having fun. And so, you know, and this idea of being captured by your employment, I think it's part of Stockholm syndrome. You know, a slave starts to love their master. They don't see any other world. They don't see any other opportunity. They're so conditioned to a false reality that they buy into it and then really put their guts into it and establish their self-worth within a system. So we have an opportunity here. And I think you bring out these good points about people making money online. I mean, there are economies going on and virtual economies that are making real money. Somehow somebody takes real money, puts it into the virtual system, and there's people in the virtual system moving that money around. We're living in a most chaotic of times, and it's really a challenge. The question is, who am I and what do I want to be? And I hope I have a teacher like Anne, you know. I hope and like John and like Manu and like Joe, you know, I think we're sovereign beings. We see ourselves as sovereign beings, able to make sovereign choices and see the system over there and decide, do I want to do this part or that part, instead of being just subjected to it. There's my 5 cents.
May I come in here?
Yeah.
Work is work. Definition, work is work. Work is force displacement. So energy is always working all around, all time. That is the definition of work. Now, how I feel and how I decide to participate is something different. So that's why I wrote here that I have a problem pitching work versus fun. Work is necessary. Work will always take place.
Yeah, that's because you're a topologist, Manu.
No, but a soccer player is sweating. He's doing work.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
somebody's sweating
Your
is
guy that is selling, the young guy that is selling over internet is doing work. He's thinking and doing.
this
But
over-
he's liking what he does, as opposed to a slave who is forced to do something that he doesn't like, he or she doesn't like.
But some slaves grow to like what they're doing.
Yes, some, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I'm just illustrating the general thing. Is that work is very, very clear to me in my mind what it is. Now, the meaning of work to me, that's where we have issues.
Okay.
The meaning of work that, you know, as you say, Dr. Frankl, he say, man search for a meaning.
Yeah.
That's the book. It's a small
A little tiny book, but it changed my life. Yeah.
It's very small book.
Okay, just to put it out there, yes, work can be from one end miserable, being exploited, to the other end where you literally have options and you can control what you do, etc., and being paid very well for it. So you literally have, but they all come under work. So what I'm saying is that why can't we have more of that? Can't we train people to have more of that? And so, but the point is like, and I'm in the education system that we're doing, and this whole, I'm pushing people from looking at this versus that, right? Like you see, in education, literally in Asia, no parent can even, it's like, no, I won't say no, majority of the parents cannot equate fun with learning. I'm like, at all. So I just share with you this, and today there are still parents who worry if the kids are having too much fun in school. The second day I was running our international school, one parent yanked the daughter out from school because she said, I didn't send my daughter to school for the teachers to tell jokes. First day of school, right? We had orientation half a day, and the other half the teachers are going into class, getting to know the kids and so on and so forth. Second day, she yanked the kid out. My English classes, I've had parents yanking the kids out and say, I didn't send my kids here to have fun, right? So, but we have a great time, and my kids are Hong Kong students came to visit and stay about 2 or 3 weeks in our school during their holidays to experience what it's like. And they went back. The parents came along with them. And this, my Hong Kong partner told me, one of the girls asked the mom, is it really possible to have so much fun and learn at the same time? Because I'm learning so much more than I ever did in school. So we have to challenge this, because if not, so even the whole environment, how the teachers are, we are creating a supportive environment. Nobody says it has to be miserable, right? So anyway, we were challenging a lot of these norms, and the worst part of it all is when you have this versus that. You know, the outcomes of the things the kids say, yeah, it completely stops the kids from understanding how wealth is generated, you know. So to them, that if they have wealth, somebody else in the world, I'm taking the money from somebody else in the world. But we know that's not how it works, right? You know, maybe back in the old days it was, but since I think late 60s or early 70s, that changed. But the point is that there is that. So, and the other one is that if I have money, I'm not going to be healthy. Okay, it's better to be healthy than wealthy. It's better. And I'm like, okay, if you can tell God that, yes, take, you know, I don't need money, but you guarantee me good health, you know, for the rest of my life. That doesn't work. Health is a human thing, whether you're rich, poor, or middle class. Health, we all have health issues. The other one is the students actually believe that it's better to be, you know, happy than wealthy, you know, and there's no guarantee that you're happy if you don't have money. There are just as many happy people, poor, middle class, and rich. There are just as many miserable people. Divorce, you know, people get divorced, whether they are poor, middle class, or I have to realign their thinking because they write things like this when they get to high school and college. Freaked the heck out of me when I first saw it, you know, but you get where I'm going with it, right? So they have to start looking at how to have both, and how do you solve problems for both, or three or four, like, you know, people able to work and still have, you know, you're in jobs where you can actually be with family and friends, and, you know, because there are jobs out there where when you go to work, it's like you go to war, you know, they're all not your friends. But can we not create a working environment where you go to work with friends and you're supportive, like your families, you're direct, and they tell you off directly, like a family would, you know? So it's about, anyway.
And I agree with you, but I think the issue you're perhaps not giving enough weight to is, I agree completely with the thrust and focus of your education with the ideal world you're talking about. However, in my experience, there are many people whose mindset is different to yours, not just those wealthy parents who pull their children out on day 2 because they're having fun, but the people whose mindset is, I'm an employer, I'm an employee, somebody else is an employer. Their position is to try and get as much out of me as they can. My position is to try and get, to do as little as I can for what I get paid. It's all very well to talk about the sports people and the entertainers employing other people. But if we're relying on employment to provide that wage, there'll be a lot of people with no income. So as I understand it, the universal wage or universal basic income is predicated on government providing it and then seeing how people react. Some people will react positively, it'll free them up, they'll write books, write music, they'll use their creativity. For other people, they'll use that on things that don't help them. They may smoke or drink or damage their health. So, Steve, is that your understanding that the universal basic income is predicated on not people getting that from sports people or entertainers who employ them, but them being guaranteed that without having to do any work at all?
Right. The issue is that government provides it without them having to do any work at all. But the government gets that money either by just printing the damn stuff or by taxing somebody. Or by taxing somebody. And if we did it right, we tax the corporations that are making the profit and let the people buy their product and just give them enough money. This is why Henry Ford wanted to pay all of his people. I think he was trying to pay his people some unearthly $14 an hour or something. He paid him back in the day. And he said, people argue with Henry Ford, why are you paying your employees so much? And he says, I want them to be able to afford to buy my cars. So, you know, this is a come back to a question. What is money? You know?
Well,
yeah, I agree. Okay, first and foremost, you know, I'm not talking about this universe. We have to create that system. And I don't have all rich kids, yeah? All right, I don't have. I only have 500 over to maybe 800. Half my kids are rich. Okay. The other half comes from upper middle. Okay. And I also have students, a few thousand students who come from the M40s and also just maybe the upper level of B40s. I do have students like that too. And the thing is that we can create that the ability for them to be able to make this happen for the people who will be working for them. So that is where I'm coming from. And I think that if we get this right, actually this is my cause. This is my cause, okay? To be able to make this happen. And I'm not talking, and the government, I'm not dependent on the government at all. So yeah, we're gonna be challenging this to make sure that the world, and you'll be surprised that if I can't go to educators for this, literally, I cannot. Not many, because wherever I go and I talk to people, when I meet educators who get this, I get so thrilled. And the thing is, we need to come together, but there are very few of us, right? We need to come together. So it is about going outside the education system to make this happen. And we are, like right now, what is happening also is because of this journey I'm going on. There is this group called the I show you the card I have here. There is this organization called I think I mentioned it, Yayasan Datuk Malaysia. Yeah, soon the people who are
Is this confidential information?
No. This
Okay,
is not.
good.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is not confidential. Yeah. Soon they will be because the partners I have to move forward with, they are part of this Yayasan, the foundation. And soon we will be able to get funding from the government through the foundation so that we can help the B40s. Like right now, we're in talks with the local sports schools. We don't have a lot, right? But we have a couple of sports schools around the country where we're training Malaysian athletes, right? But the problem is they're paid what, $200 to as a national athlete a month. You know, they can't even get sponsorship because a lot of sponsorships have gone to the key opinion leaders, the social media influencers, and because they not all of them are at the top level of the sports, they can't get funding to go compete on a global level, right? So and what about those, the thousands who train and get nowhere with their sport? So we're actually in talks with the sports school to look at matching funding from CSR companies who want to do CSR or foundations that can get funds like this. And we are stepping in to go train the athletes who are being trained solely to become athletes so that they know how to, whatever happens to them in the future, they'll know how to pivot to become an entrepreneur. Okay.
Yes. I just want to say this so that, maybe we progress. If you guys allow me 2 minutes or 1 minute. Is this. I start with teaching from Confucius. That's basically that education without practice is useless.
Right.
And practice without education is dangerous. Now, when I look at everything that we have, we only have whatever what we say, we only have for now, for foreseeable future, only one Earth, one. So what I think is going on is the challenge of paradigms. So the metaverse and all of these things will allow people to free their mind from the shackle, to be able to elevate themselves and be thinking, playing into that space, to be conscious of it. But ultimately, they have to learn. The smartest people in the world, I'm taking Bill Gates, he's in the pace of becoming one of the biggest land concentrators in the world. It's buying land all over.
Yeah.
What does it teach me? Is that you have to be anchored in the reality with the knowledge that is global in order to successfully tackle the challenges that we have.
Yeah,
That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah,
So
it's
danger
not-
is for people. Yeah.
We
it's not an
probably-
either or thing. It's both. It's both or four of whatever things, struggles, learning. That's my point. It's about having everything. You have to do everything. It's not an either or thing. Yeah. But I think it's very, very doable. Okay. Steve, you want to say something?
Well, there's another point on this, and that is there's a big debate in the US as to when, and I think they're loosening up all of these restrictions as to when high school and college players, so much money is being made off of kids playing sports.
That's
And
all.
everybody's making the money except the kids playing the sports.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we have the problem with the kids are having fun, and fun is generating money, but they're not getting any of it. So there's the other side of that coin. And I think I love the mission you're on, Ann. Keep going for it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see where we land, huh? But thank you for this
Yeah.
back and forth.
I'll tell you, my seat got hot as you talked, Ann. You got my butt burning. Okay, good. Where are we? I think we're in the meantime.
Yes.
In the meantime, all the industrial research and development, as well as its products, have become involved with the invisible technologies of atomics, electronics, chemistry, molecular alloying, and information processing. All the research and development of all the products and services that are going to affect all of our forward days are now being conducted in the realm of the electromagnetic spectrum reality, not directly apprehendable by any of the human senses. While the North American situated factories and spectacular city buildings seem to be and are thought of by humans as being American property because they are located on American land, most are no longer USA people owned. For instance, though thought of as American, a majority of the skyscrapers of Honolulu belong to Japanese bankers. Arabian oil billionaires own many US city skyscrapers. Kuwait owns the large South Carolina coastal island, the Kiowa. What was once world-around high credit for American ingenuity and friendliness is no longer existent. On February 1, 1982, the United States ambassador to the United Nations stated to the media that all the United Nations now hate the USA. What they hate is Grunch, but Grunch is able to deceive the world into blaming the very innocent people of the United States. All the continental USA's industrial factories and grounds, and 90% of all that can and does produce physical wealth, has already become or is about to become the humanly invisible property of inhumanly operative supranational corporations controlled by the invisible human owners of invisible Swiss bank account code numbers. A vast new giant of approximately no-risk capitalism is now astride the world, earning over $1 trillion a year. This supranational giant's monopoly of know-how, wealth, research and development and production and distribution facilities is worth at least $20 trillion US dollars, September 1981. While the giant now owns and controls 4/5 of planet Earth's open market bankable assets, 1 trillion of those giants' assets are in monetary gold bullion. Astride spherical spaceship Earth, the supranational corporate Grunch of Giants faces a political giant of non-capitalistic forces controlling the lives of 2/3 of humanity.
I wanted to just say something here. we're having big water issues in the West out here. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but like the Colorado River supplies water to Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, and Nevada. And we're out of water. And so all of our water rights are based on meander lines and water supplies that existed 100 years ago that were optimistic when they were projected in the first place. And here's what's interesting. There are huge Saudi Arabian corporations that have bought up tons of ground in Arizona. They're watering the ground to grow alfalfa and shipping the alfalfa to Saudi Arabia using US water. And just crazy. Just another sample of what he's talking about. Any other comments or questions?
That's an interesting point. I want to just make a real quick mention about the idea of no risk capitalism, because that is a real problem.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that the government is involved in de-risking for corporations, but they actually aren't, they aren't necessarily doing anybody a favor by doing that. By allowing the corporations just to go bankrupt in certain cases. I think that would be a much more just and much more efficient. And one of the first calls that I think we were on with Kelly is that, that's not regenerative. That's the idea. You're not letting something die that has taken, unreasonable or ill-advised risks. So I think that that's an important point that Bucky's hitting on, because I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing established corporations being able to still remain in power despite downturns or whatever else may be taking place.
Right. They should have gone out of business, and they didn't, because the government saved them. One of the big things that most Americans don't realize is that during the crash of 2008, that all these banks were failing, the insurance companies were covering them, the insurance companies were covering all these losses, and the insurance companies ran out of money, and the company that insured the insurance company, called AGI, had to be bailed out by the US government to fund all the insurances that rescued all of the businesses, plus the bailout money that was granted. This AGI funding redemption issue most people didn't understand at all what that was, and that's one of the biggest heists of them all.
It was given to Warren Buffett for that purpose. But one point that I think that has been mentioned that is very important is that 40 years ago, you see the leverage was 20%, was 5%. They had 20 trillion of assets, of which one it was in bullion.
Right.
That's 5%. Today, even that experiment has been abandoned. There is almost zero in bullion. And the debt is, and all assets are debts, basically. So you're talking about the derivatives, you're talking about the risk on risk compounded, and that is all on debt. And it is, I don't know what there's no recourse today, but the Jubilee, there's nothing else. We're running like lemons into the precipice.
Well, any other comments? Let's continue to read here. Go ahead, John. In making
these observations in regard to inanimate corporations, we do not infer antisocial attitudes on the part of the corporate officers. A corporation's executives are elected by its board of directors. The directors are elected by the number of shares of stock as voted directly by their holders or as voted by the holders of their shares' proxies. This voting is not on a democratic one stockholder, one vote basis, but on any as many votes as shares owned basis. This being so, the corporation's lawyers have no alternative to reminding any altruistic, socially concerned executives that the corporation is committed by law only to making money for its shareholders, and therefore that any socially concerned, altruistic proclivities of any corporate executive must be realised outside the corporation and at the executive's own expense. For all the same basic reasons, the inanimate, literally soulless and heartless corporations cannot feel and express human sensitivities and thoughts, such as I find printed on desktop cards in my hotel rooms around the world. I find it specious for a hotel chain to assume the role of moral arbiter by, for example, printing cards displayed in their hotel rooms which define love as being the act of forbearance from stealing the hotel's towels, or by exploiting the public concern over energy problems by asserting on their room cards that love is saving the electric current costs. Since the corporation is only a legal device, the only possible reason for paying those love cards printing costs is to reduce the hotel's operating costs, thus hopefully to increase the corporate dividends. Such operational tricks may well bring about promotion for the ingenious executives who conceive them. In the August 3, 1981 issue of Time appeared the following article. President Reagan appointed William Baxter, a Stanford law professor who firmly believes in the virtues of large-scale enterprises, unfettered by excessive government regulation, to be his antitrust chief in the Justice Department. Baxter's boss, Attorney General William French Smith, succinctly stated the new administration's philosophy in an oft-quoted speech before the District of Columbia Bar. Said Smith, bigness in business is not necessarily badness. Efficient firms should not be hobbled under the guise of antitrust enforcement. Baxter openly accepts some responsibility for the merger phenomenon. Said he last week, the statements we've made at the Justice Department have allowed people to think about mergers that they really wouldn't have thought about in past administrations. Mobil's bid for Conoco is a case in point. Such a merger between two of the top 10 petroleum companies would never have been seriously considered during Jimmy Carter's term. Baxter insists that his trust busters will not allow any acquisition that significantly reduces competition within the oil industry or any other. He also maintains that a Mobil-Conoco combination would be subjected to tough scrutiny in Washington. That is one reason why the subsequent alternative deal, which united non-oil DuPont and oil Conoco, was countenanced. Baxter should be wary, if only because the American public has long been apprehensive about excessive corporate power. Attorney General Smith admits the strains of populist hostility towards large companies are deeply ingrained in the USA. Government trustbusters have enjoyed broad public support as they attacked both concentration within an industry and combinations between corporate giants in unrelated businesses. Yet the burgeoning growth of corporate America has outpaced all the antitrust efforts. Since World War II, the portion of US industry controlled by the 200 largest manufacturing firms has risen from 45% to 60%. Socioeconomically, that is from majority to minority control. I think that should be the other way around, but anyway.
No, he's saying what Bucky said. That's what he said.
Yes.
Socioeconomically.
60% of US industry is controlled by the 200 largest manufacturing firms. So
No,
they've
it
now
said
they've got majority
60%
control.
was before socio-economically majority control.
Yeah.
It's become 40%.
Yeah.
That's the way I understand it.
The Attorney General chooses his words carefully. What he speaks of as US industry is not the ownership of the corporations conducting the industrial activity. He speaks exclusively of the physical production activity itself, taking place under the roofs of factory buildings situated within the geographical borders of the US of North America. The capital title to and productive earnings of those are 60% owned and controlled by the entirely unknown majority owners of the escaped from America supranational corporations, the Grunch. 1/3 of humanity lives outside the lands controlled by socialism, all unbeknownst to and undetected by the 1/5 of the 1/3 of humanity residents within the USA, gradually crossbreeding worldians, their 1/3 of a century ago kudos for realistically articulated generosity to and concern for others, as well as the US people's legal ownership and control of their economic assets, have been altogether exploited, usurped or stolen from them by the invisibly integrated supranational corporate giants. The Grunch has conducted its ruthlessly selfish activity, always in the name of the US people. The now majorly literate crossbreeding world humans are now looking askance at both the socialist and capitalist giants as these politically opposed powers multiply their to anywhere deliverable humanity annihilating bombs. Modern weapons are growing so sophisticated and so small that any future arms control agreement would be impossible to monitor and enforce, according to a Knight Ridder News Service dispatch. What we are going to see in the next generation of weapons is invisibility, which translates into insecurity, according to William Kincaid, a former naval intelligence officer. Even such an informed source as Admiral Stansfield Turner, former head of the Grand Naval Strategy formulating US Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, then Commander-in-Chief of the US Navy's Mediterranean Fleet, and then Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, says, any hope of limiting total destructiveness is slipping past us. In the affairs of the supranational corporate giants, real quality of product, consciously sustained, has given way to packaging allure and advertising proclaimed quality as commensurate only with the best interests of corporate money-making. As already mentioned, heads of great corporations are elected by the stockholders' directors, who in turn are chosen by those controlling the majority of voting shares, who make their choices only on the basis of greatest earnings performance. Operating only as abstract, global magnitude legal entities, all the unknown, owned and controlled supranational corporations have no human community consideration other than as potential customers, consumers, or fighting force conscriptees.
Any comments or questions before we go into Eisenhower's talk?
Scary, very scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
Well, I mean, you could see the evolution of corporations becoming bigger and more powerful than the government, and actually using the government in order to obtain power. I want to make a comment about something that maybe a while back, and I don't want to bring us back too far, but I just want to, just something that I thought about. One of the things that we were talking about work and how people accumulate wealth without work. Well, there's money that makes money that doesn't do anything. And there are assets that remain unimproved that don't do anything. And they accumulate wealth through that. And I think that that's highly problematic, because those are resources that ought to be taxed. I'll just say that, and ought to be put to work in a rejuvenative way. That's all. That's something I wanted to add to that. As far as everything we just read, I think, for me, I think Bucky's outlining essentially, if you even go back to what he was saying about DuPont and the mergers and acquisitions that were actually taking place, and the lack of regulation around these corporations is highly problematic. People often oppose regulations. Sometimes it's justified, but other times it's not. And unfortunately, the public's not informed enough to know when to oppose a regulation and when to actually want one enforced. And we talked about Glass-Steagall here before. And I think that's an example of one you'd want enforced versus some that you don't want enforced. Anyway, those are just some of my comments.
Any other comments or questions? John DeLorean was a real controversial dude by the end of things. He put a lot on the line and broke some ethical grounds, maybe to fund his company and for the DeLorean car. But he once was quoted, at the time he was really high respected, and he made a comment. I've just been looking for it. It's not on the internet, but I remember him making a comment about corporate ethics and how that corporate ethics are always reduced to the lowest denominator. Right. Because the corporation's responsibility is to make a profit. So if anybody on the board of directors says something sleazy, unless it's illegal, everybody has to say yes, because if they don't vote for it, they violate their charter as shareholders to increase the profits of the corporation.
But that is changing in some areas, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah.
I mean, as an example, we have an energy company, AGL in Australia.
Yeah.
And Mike Cannon-Brookes is a billionaire, one of the founders of Atlassian. And he decided to upset AGL, which was primarily generating energy from coal-fired power stations and generating significant pollution. And he bought a large enough shareholding in the company to cause a spill to cost a number of senior executives their positions and to change the direction of the company. Yeah. And already the company's accelerated its plans to phase out coal-fired power stations with the influence of an extremely wealthy shareholder who's driven by community considerations rather than profit considerations. He's made his billions. He has an incredibly successful company. And so he's making changes. Now, there's a shareholder whose motivation was not maximizing the return to shareholders, but injecting social responsibility into the company. And so, I think we will see instances of that, but not enough and not fast enough.
In the US, we developed, our state, Utah, has a thing called a B corporation as opposed to a C corporation. And the B corporation is supposed to be more, their charter is more tuned to community values and sustainability, but nobody understood. Most people, when they set up a business in the States, go for the LLC, limited liability company, or the C Corp. Very few people even think about a B Corp, even know that it's there. Hey, Joe, a while ago, you introduced me to a guy who has started a fund that was supposed to, I don't want to call it conscious capitalism, but we showed a video on one of these calls from this guy. And I've just been looking on my computer to find it, and I can't find it. But he quit Wall Street and started his own funding company. And now there are green companies out there, hedge funds.
Yeah.
Who's that guy?
What was his name? John.
Yeah, John made sense.
It was John. He was with JP Morgan. And
he left.
Yeah. I forget his name off the top of my head. But yeah, he actually has mentioned Bucky in some of his analysis, but he actually he focuses
I think it's John Fullerton. Is that his name?
That's his name, John Fullerton.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does a lot of good work as far as looking at regenerative systems and investing in companies that are actually, focused on not just profit, but the conscientious part of the environment and corporate ethics as well.
We've
When you
got
said John, I looked it up. It's John Fullerton, and he is the dude. And there's some really cool videos on him.
He does fantastic work.
It's called Capital Institute,
Right.
is his company.
It's free classes, I think.
He's
too.
calling himself an impact investor.
Hmm.
Yep.
Do you have ESG considerations with companies in the US? Environmental, social, and governance?
No, we have
Okay.
EPA. That's all we have is EPA.
So an increasing number of investors in Australia look at the environmental, social, and governance issues surrounding a company before they invest in it. And there are investment advisors that target those considerations in putting investors into companies. So they look at the impact of the company on the environment, on society. So they wouldn't be putting people into tobacco companies, for example. Or into alcohol producing companies.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay, good. This John Fullerton guy, he talks about regenerative business,
yeah.
creating businesses that are regenerative by their very nature.
I wish I'd known about him 20 years ago.
Yeah, he's been out there kind of as a Rambo guy for quite a while. Okay, we'll continue the reading here. We have a little more time, I think.
That I wanted to talk about,
Go
but
ahead.
I'm trying to remember what it was though. It was something not with I forget. It was in the text, and there was just something that it was right before they talked about the antitrust, but it'll come to me anyway. Not important.
There's big talk in the US right now about breaking up Facebook and what does Facebook own?
Meta.
Yeah,
No, sorry,
Meta owns Facebook, but they also own
Yeah.
another social
Oh,
media
yes, yeah.
like TikTok or something.
Yeah, and Instagram and all that, but
Instagram.
Google.
when Google, I mean, but the heart, it really is, the law is not catching up to these technological companies, and it's been very disappointing to see that it doesn't seem to change over the past 20 years. That
Well, when the US government was actively talking about breaking up Microsoft,
right,
Microsoft made plans to just move north across the border into Canada.
right,
Had the US government proceeded with
Yeah.
what was being discussed quite actively publicly. What are we talking about? 30 years ago now? How long? It was a long time ago, wasn't it, Steve? Was
Yeah.
it 20 years?
yeah,
30 years.
around 90. I remember that, it was late
And
90s.
so Microsoft just made plans and said, well, if you do that, we'll just move north. We'll
Right.
move across the border. We'll base ourselves in Canada.
I just pasted in the chat that Meta's company owns Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, and MetaQuest. And right now, because of the problems with elections in America, the Congress actually has people talking about breaking up because Instagram is too close to Facebook. WhatsApp is too close to Instagram. They're talking about breaking that thing up so that there are more people worried about the ethics of what's going on social media. Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, here we go. Whoops. Now we're going into the Eisenhower statements here.
Yes. At the termination of his presidency, Eisenhower expressed his shocked dismay over the exclusively self-concerned military-industrial complex that he had found to be growing inexorably as a malignant economic organism. There is no question of Eisenhower's innocence of such a phenomena, as he assumed his great responsibility. In the same way, I am confident that Reagan is utterly unaware of the existence, magnitude, and nature of the supranational colossus. He knows he is dealing with rich and business-wise proven individuals whose organisational management effectiveness is of a high order. Because the colossus is operating an invisible technology and society is so specialised that each individual is acquainted with only a few of the billions of other specialised indivisibilities, and because of the invisibility of who the supranational shareholders may really be and where they are, I'm confident that Reagan truly thinks he is operating strictly within the historic limits of a US national government and not as a stooge of an invisible grunch of literally soulless supranational giants. I don't think David Rockefeller or any of the justices of the US Supreme Court or Volcker, head of the Federal Reserve Bank, or Margaret Thatcher, or the heads of any of the world's governments think of their problems in the realistic terms of their being governed entirely by the inanimate, socially unconcerned supranational colossi, as the possibly lethally non-human growth could prove to be. However, Grunch could also prove to be an army of benign giants because it will depend more and more on its complex world-around computerization integration, and the data entered into that integrated network will continually evidence that the present technology could make the world work for everyone and at a much more profitable level than realised from weapons production. Nor do I think these present world structure spokespeople see the supranational corporations as the unwittingly benevolent agent of evolution about to close the historical era of separate nation states and to institute in its stead the era of omni-economically successful, omni-integrated planetary society. For the past 30 years, the US government's grand defence strategy has been a puppet of the supranational corporate giants, with the strings invisibly manipulated. This policy has concentrated on accumulating greater numbers of atomic bombs than those of the USSR, all the while the USSR was only ostensibly endeavouring to keep pace with the USA bomb production. In reality, the USSR was dominantly preoccupied with building an all-oceans, primarily underwater navy from scratch and expanding numerically its conventional weapons army divisions. At the time Eisenhower became President of the United States, the military experts of both the USA and USSR had independently concluded that a missile-delivered atomic war would be the first war in history in which both sides would be utterly devastated. In gun munition warfare, whoever shot first and accurately won. The other man's shot never got away. In 14,000 miles per hour delivery rocketry warfare, the 670 million miles per hour operating radar vision of both sides gives each side enough advance notice after its respective enemy has fired to let loose all of its arsenal before the enemy's missiles arrive. For the first time in warfare history, both sides utterly lose. For those hotheads in the capitalist world who as yet contemplate preemptive firing of the USA arsenal of atomic warheads, it is importantly relevant that the Russians have accurate, geographically triangulated positioning of their USA targets, while the USA does not have accurate geodetic triangulation of the location of most of the USSR targets. To best understand the present November 1981 world crisis, it is necessary to turn history back for almost a century, back to when Edison invented the electric lamp and the direct current generator. J.P. Morgan Sr., the economic power structure giant, was the first to act upon the realization that whoever developed, manufactured, installed, and controlled the physical energy generators and the metered energy distribution and cutoff system could and would control the national economies into which they were physically introduced. The air we breathe was everywhere so plentiful that its availability could not readily be monopolised. There were too many ponds, lakes, rivers, brooks, and wells to make the metered water supply systems a generally monopolisable business. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, it had to compete with the post office conducted mail and required far greater numbers of employees. Morgan saw that the copper mines and the electric equipment manufactured from copper, as well as all the power generating companies, involved the least labour participation and the then maximally profitable business. All of the foregoing required the availability and controllability of an utterly unprecedented magnitude of physical apparatus and installation of otherwise unemployed monetary wealth. The patents of Edison's inventions and an army of astute lawyers and brokerage houses became the pivotal, legal precedent accepted economic properties and workforce in amassing the initial procurement capital of Morgan's power monopoly.
Any comments or questions here? Let's give John's voice a rest just for a minute. Get a drink of water, John. John, you're doing a great job. Any other comments or questions here? You know, Ed, did anybody see the movie Total Recall?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Oh, you were on. I didn't see it, John. Do you remember the movie Total Recall, Arnold Schwarzenegger? They were on Mars, and there were companies there trying to control the underground ice because that would control the oxygen in the air. And they were limiting the amount of oxygen people could get. And US corporations have gone into every country and tried to buy their natural resources. They've tied up their water. They've done a bunch of stuff, and there have been revolutions in many of these countries where the people just want their water supply back.
That's one of the James Bond movies. About the fourth or fifth last James Bond movie was about a South American country where they tied up the water supply.
Yeah.
That's a major.
I think, yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'll just say, I think it's touching there on one problem that is fundamental. Whoever, being a nation or nations, that ignore the straight correlation between production and energy, do so at their own peril. People are talking about renewable today, but there's no, if you take the sun, there's no power generation at night. There's no power generation in winter. If you take wind, when it's quiet, there's no power generation. It completely underplays, you know, all of these things completely underplay what could have been thought if people, what could have been if people were thinking more globally in terms of phases of energy, forms of energy, and patterns of energy in terms of production, in terms of reserve, in terms of usage.
Cool beans. You complete?
Yeah. And then you see here, JP Morgan, he realized if I control energy input and energy metering, that is charging people for use, you control everything.
Yeah. Cool. Joe, did you have something?
I'll save it to my takeaway because it's a little bit.
Okay.
Ago.
Okay, we're approaching about that time. Shall we finish one more paragraph here?
Okay. This initial capital amassing was greatly augmented by selling interest-bearing bonds to widows and trust funds in general, seemingly safely secured by the vast lands given as a grateful US people's government as a subsidy to the pioneer railway building and operating companies. The railroad company bonds were secured by the seemingly highly valuable real estate adjacent to all the railroad cross-country rights of way, their way station town properties, railway stations, trackage, etc., which railroad company bonds were purchased for widows and trust funds in general by their trustees. This capital amassing initially financed the electric power companies. As we have noted elsewhere, these railroad bonds became worthless in the 1929 economic crash. Nobody wished to buy the old depot buildings, etc. One more. When the automobiles and auto trucks took so much business from the railways as to render the railroad passenger systems profitless and cross-country pipeable petroleum replaced coal as a prime fuel, and giant transoceanic tankers were developed, and the Middle East oil lands were explored and developed, the petroleum business rose swiftly to become the maximum economic power giant of the 20th century, outpowering the Morgan utilities and banks-based system.
Okay, you know, he's right about nobody wanted to buy old depot buildings, but ultimately those right-of-ways and all that ground next to those railroad tracks have been worth lots of money.
Yeah.
You know, if the guys who needed money to live didn't benefit, but the guys who could hang on to the investment over time sure paid off. Now in Utah, there's a major boom going along, and I think this is true in every community in the world. When you have public transportation going by a major road, suddenly the four corners around that joint, around that crossroads, becomes immensely valuable, because they're building housing there and they're building a lot of things there so people can take that public transportation. Anyway, any other comments or questions? Okay, you know, I want to go a little bit further. We'll go ahead and mark that right there. I think we ended off with banks-based systems, right? So we're going to begin with right there next time. Do I have that right?
Yep.
All right, really good. Okay. Joe, you seem to be beaming with a potential takeaway. How you feeling, and what's your takeaway tonight?
I mean, I have a lot of takeaways. I think actually what Manu said in the beginning was accurate and very important, is that, you know, sometimes Bucky underestimated governments and overestimated technology, because like a lot of these structures are actually still in place, and the technology has gotten a lot better. So I think that that's a really important point. The other thing that I've been thinking about is that, you know, there was a couple of times that they talked about, you know, kind of like, I think I heard term socialism or things like that in there. And there's something that was said that I tend to agree with. We do have socialism, it's just for corporations and it's not for people. And I think that that's a, you know, and I think that that's a very powerful statement, because it gives power to these conglomerates that he was talking about. So I think that and it actually incentivizes consolidation in certain industries. And so I think that was really important. I think capturing the no risk capitalism, where the government is in the business of de-risking. There's an economist, Mariana Mazzucato, who's written a lot of books about public-private partnerships. And she, you know, she's a very good spokesperson for that. But she talks about how, you know, the government is essentially just in the business of de-risking markets. And that's not their role. They actually, the role is to be, you know, if they're going to invest, they should actually, in certain cases, they should actually somehow get a return, and it should be kind of rejuvenative, where you know, there's other grants that are actually funded through this. So for an example, something like the vaccine that was, you know, funded through government research for COVID, you know, that was essentially done through a grant, you know, and I believe it was at the University of Pennsylvania. So a government grant. Yeah, everybody else capitalized on it. So that is an example where there's public-private partnerships that are possible, and the government should get incentives for that. There are problems with that, but it's still a better system than what we have right now. And I really liked the conversation around the idea of work. You know, what does it really mean? In the sense that I liked Manu's definition. I mean, even looking at it topologically, I thought that was very good. Looking at work as is energy. But there's a lot of capital that is not exerting any energy and that it's being accumulated, and assets that are just let's just call them, whether it be unimproved land, which is not a bad thing sometimes, but or just interest on interest, money on money. So so that, I mean, this is a very deep book with that's highlighting a lot of the problems that we've seen in the 80s specifically. And he's noting how leaders at that particular moment in time were not even cognizant of how these corporations were taking over. People, you know, people like Reagan or Thatcher or whomever else was in there. Or maybe they were, I don't know. But they do seem like puppets. Anyway, those are my takeaways. A little all over the place. So, Anne, how are you? And
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yep. Okay, a lot to think about here. And thank you. I really enjoyed that back and forth thingy that we went on, you know, to kind of just talk about the whole idea of work. Very interesting. And also, thank you for, you know, this John Fullerton,
so
for introducing that. Yeah, because I'm looking at exactly what Steve has shared, the principles. Yeah. Principles of regenerative economy. And the other one is what Henry Ford said, pay his staff well so they can afford a car. And I think that may be something that needs to be one of those controls that need to be, you know, or what you call terms and conditions in handling all these big mergers and acquisitions. If they can do that, I think that would make a whole lot more sense, where more of the people actually what do you call it, benefit, you know, financially from all these huge profits being made across, you know, many of these companies. So yeah, a lot to think about on that one. So Manu, how do you feel and what is your takeaway?
Sorry, I feel good in spite of my poor state here now, because you know I didn't have any meaningful sleep, but it was really interesting. And again, thank Anne for always bringing, you know, real life and today's, you know, cases. They might be controversial there, but they have the pound of value in terms of discussing and enlightening us. What I take away is one or two things. One, I've drafted here a definition of comprehensivism, that is understanding dualism, and that everything inherently has phases, and learning how to anticipate and or to handle them when they eventually or actually occur. I take that from the fact that most of the time, we forget that everything, when I say fundamentalism of dualism, there's always something that goes with, there's a consequence to whatever that is done. Like we saw John talk about in terms of UBI, then what about personal choices? What about the aspirations? About UBI, what about confiscation by powers? So if you understand that there's always phases of things, and there's always something that is linked to whatever you consider, then you can start anticipating and learning how and putting in place things that how to handle those things when they eventually happen. That's one thing. And then the second is monetizing and digitizing heighten the risk of spoliation and misappropriation. And the third thing that I get here is what Steve says, okay, the land that belonged to the real because of change of technology, became less valuable. But think about it, 20 years or 40 years later with telecommunication, what happened to that line again? And the fiber up again. So that's to me is one of the reasons why you should always be anchored. There's anchoring in every system. And anchor is what guides you like your north star. I'm going on this ocean, but there's that star. And that fixes me towards where I want to go. So those are the little things that I got today. Otherwise, I'm very grateful and thankful for what we give here and what we contribute in your presence. John, how do you feel? What do you take away?
I feel troubled. Reading what Bucky wrote 40 years ago, I believe the problem's bigger than it was then. As we say, Bucky was optimistic. His optimism hasn't proved to be well-founded. And I think it's all your problem, really, because the fundamental, I think, that's required is better education. When I think of the number of people around me, around us, in our communities and in the world, have no idea of what's going on.
Right.
They're uninformed, or they're ill-informed, or they're misinformed. And that's how people are manipulated by governments and by big business. Social media has a part to play in it, but it's bigger than that. I mean, we've had social media used to manipulate the results of elections in countries. What was it? What was that company? Oxford. The people who were
Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, the people who were taking money to influence the results of elections in countries, exposing the extent to which social media can be manipulated and to achieve results that aren't in anybody's best interest. It's in fact undermining democracy. But my brother lived and worked in the United States for many years in education, and he told me that the general level of education in the United States in government schools was very, very poor. So the best of the private schools, the best of the private universities are excellent, but the general level of, and he'd been a principal of a school in Australia, and then he worked with Microsoft in the area of education and technology. But he said the average level of education in the US was very, very poor. I've seen television programs where people were interviewed in the street in the United States, and their limited knowledge of anything outside the United States was embarrassing. So we have all these people. How do we convince families and companies and governments that you're actually better off having your population educated than dumbing them down? Because if you do it to try and manipulate them, somebody might be more effective at manipulating them than you are. And even as Bucky was saying, national leaders, presidents, prime ministers were ill-informed and uninformed and didn't appreciate the extent of the power and control of the Grunch. So it's concerning. I mean, we're doing our bit through this to add to our knowledge and understanding, to be aware of the problems, but I just feel a concern and a frustration how we can better educate a greater number of people so that they're less at risk of being manipulated and taken advantage of in the way that obviously has been done for many, many, many years. So feeling a little trouble. That's how I finished today. So Steve, I hope you've got something bright to say.
I don't know. I've loved every one of your comments, and the fact that you all keep showing up on this and sharing your paradigms. I think hopefully we're reinforcing each other. I know I'm being reinforced, and I'm getting my rough edges then smoothed out as I hear your points of view, and that's exciting for me. The big thing that comes out for me is the language issue here, because I don't think any one of us would disagree with what Anne is doing with her education. And yet at the same time, we just trip over the rhetoric of these words of what work is and what fun is and what corporations are and what profit is. And when I hear of rich, or well-to-do people pulling students out of Anne's school because they're having too much fun. I mean, we're, as human beings, it seems like the human beings are just so conditioned. They've developed their, as you pointed out, John, we tend to get our personal sense of value from our employment, from our slavery. And it really is slavery in many, many cases. And even though it's disguised as a CEO, he's a slave or she's a slave. And I love this idea that the people can survive. I love the spirit of Buckminster Fuller and the spirit of Ann Town. I love those spirits. And I hope we overcome this language thing. I put a couple of links in here. One of the things I put is besides the John Fullerton stuff, which I think is important to review. We maybe had it on here 6 months or 8 months ago, but every time I look at those videos, I learn something new. There's a movie in there written by Albert Brooks, starring Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep, called Defending Your Life. And I watch it every year. I watch Scrooged every year. I watch Defending Your Life every year. I watch Groundhog Day every other year. And then when Tom Cruise came out with Edge of Tomorrow, I watch that about every third year. It's about human beings making choices and overcoming fear and being what we are. In the movie Defending Your Life, Rip Torn, who's the defender for Albert Brooks, who's dead now, and he's trying to defend himself to whether to move on in the universe or to go back and do it again and get it right this time. They talk about the human beings. Rip Torn says to Albert Brooks' character, I use 48% of my brain. Do you know how much percent of your brain you use? He goes, 47. And Rip Torn goes, no, 3 to 5%. The average human being on Earth goes 3 to 5%. And he goes, really? He says, yeah. If you used any more than 3 to 5% of your brain, you wouldn't want to be on Earth. And he talks about the idea of getting smarter. And really, as the conversation goes on, it's not just about getting smarter here. It's about getting
Feed your kids the protein, fiber, multigrain,
Is that mine or is that somebody else?
That was me. I clicked on one of the links. Okay, yeah, I was going to save the links.
They turn on automatically. So these are really great links. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that, and being smarter means being more compassionate, being more heart-driven rather than just brain-driven. This concept of what is profit. I'm spending a lot of, because we've talked about profit in terms of pollution, but I've come to some big issues about what profit is. I'm looking at wealth, the ontology of wealth, the ontology of profit. Another link I put in there is that John Denver, he started a foundation in Aspen, Colorado called WinStar Institute, and he was
quite close to Bucky.
Bucky came and spoke there. Bucky, he designed geodesic domes there and was doing spaceship Earth farming there, quite close to Bucky. And I put another link in there, the WinStar tribute to Buckminster Fuller, where John Denver's there, and also is Robert Kiyosaki's there, and Crum is there, I think, even. The Crum guy you mentioned there, John. I think
Tom Crum hung around. When Robert Kiyosaki had dealings with Bucky in the very latter stages of his life.
Right.
I think he was actually involved. They videoed many, many hours of Bucky. I've got the videos somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
But I got them from Robert Kiyosaki.
Yeah.
And Kiyosaki knew Denver and Crum and
right.
Wow.
And this guy Crum talks on this video on this WinStar tribute to Buckminster Fuller. He's one of the speakers there, along with John and Rob, along with Kiyosaki and others. So I put some links there. And you know what was interesting? Because we talk about getting smarter or getting harder, more heart. John Denver was depressed in the latter part of his career, in spite of his beautiful voice and his beautiful music. I mean, Rolling Stone magazine called him the Mickey Mouse of rock and roll. And that affected John Denver desperately. And it took him a long time to overcome that. But, you know, the idea of being harder, of being smarter and hearter, having more compassion is Mickey Mouse to a lot of people on this planet. And we got to overcome that. So, okay, opinion leaders, okay, influencers, let's go. So I'm really grateful. Thank you all very, very much. I'm complete.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good. We'll
Thanks.
see you all
See
next
you
week.
next week.
Yep. Peace. Oh my goodness.
Stop the recording. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Because then I had to catch some sleep